Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is the first in our series for Digital Building Week. I'm Chloe McCulloch. I'm Editorial Director at Assemble Media Group and Editor of Building. And today's webinar is all about maximising data for net zero in the built environment. So with me today, I've got a great panel. I've got Josh D'Addario, Principal Consultant at the Open Data Institute, Chiara Cozzolino, Associate Director at TP Bennett, and Dan Scott, Chief Data Scientist at WSP. So today's panel, we will talk about their work on some successful data-driven net zero projects and initiatives, and we'll also look at the wider data landscape for net zero to put all of that into some context. So I know that Josh has got a lot of interesting information to share with you about how well thought through net zero data strategies can be used to cut operational and embodied carbon. So I'm really looking forward to that one. We've also got Chiara talking about TP Bennett's in-house database of sustainable materials. So that's really interesting. And Dan is going to explain a bit about the ESG strategies that WSP's clients have and that are driving some of the targets for better performance in their built assets and better data management alongside that. So we've got some really interesting presentations coming up for you. A really quick reminder that you're welcome to post questions throughout this 1 hour session. We have a lot of people registered, so we will try to get as many of them as we can at the end in the Q&A session. And also that this webinar is being recorded. So if you do miss any of it or you think colleagues might want to look at it later, we do have an on-demand service and that will be available probably an hour after we finish. So that's probably enough for me. I and the other presenters are going to turn off our cameras and mics, and Josh is going to kick us off with his presentation.
Thank you very much, Chloe. And yes, hi everybody. Thank you for giving me the time to speak with you today. As mentioned, I'm Josh D'Addario. I'm the Principal Consultant at the ODI, the Open Data Institute. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, the ODI was set up nearly 10 years ago by Tim Berners-Lee and Nigel Shadbolt. We're a nonprofit organization based in London, but we have a global mission and vision. And that is that we want a world where data works for all. And we work with the private and public sector to help build open and trustworthy data ecosystems. So we offer a range of services and activities aimed at helping people and organizations to work better with data. These include working on applied research projects, assessing new models for data sharing and stewardship, evaluating the value of data to organizations worldwide. We have a public policy practice that provides advisory and consultancy services to inform policymaking, build understanding of data policy worldwide, and our consultancy services enable businesses and other organizations to make the most of their data, working closely with clients to develop tailored strategies and embed best practices. So our theory of change focuses on improving openness and trust to create impact from data. By improving infrastructure, capabilities, and innovation, we can create more open data ecosystems where more value can flow. And by ensuring that data activities include ethics, equity, and engagement, we can ensure that value can flow to more people. One final introductory point about the Open Data Institute and open data more broadly is that although we're the Open Data Institute, we don't actually believe that all data should be open, but that increasing openness in data can deliver value to society. So as our data spectrum shows, you may have seen it before if you're familiar with the world of open data, but maybe a new graphic for you. Some data must be closed to protect individuals. Some data must be shared to the right groups to create insights, services, and policies. And some data should be available to all. So when we talk about maximizing data for net zero in the built environment, this means getting that mix right. And that often means making data more open than it is now. Okay, but my presentation for today will be focused on communicating the key points from a recent paper that we authored with Arup, where we coined the term net zero data strategies and how organizations, especially in the built environment, need them to succeed as a business and to hit their net zero targets. But what does a net zero data strategy do? Well, a net zero data strategy should direct built environment organizations to use data better to reduce operational carbon emissions through more efficient and more decarbonized operations, as well as to reduce their embodied carbon emission through promoting greener service offerings. It should also look beyond better data use internally and foreground data sharing to improve transparency over emissions, the critical factor for measuring our global progress toward net zero goals. And it should also encourage built environment organizations to explore sharing data for more than transparency and enable data collaboration and innovation through open and shared data infrastructure to create scalable net zero solutions. So, we don't have a blueprint for a net zero data strategy yet, but we do know some of the building blocks. So that's building and maintaining strong data infrastructure, such as data catalogs, data access technologies such as APIs, open standards, data institutions, and more. Implementing robust data governance, ensuring organizational alignment with the strategy, and defining responsibilities for net zero data actions. Cultivating data literacy and skills, so not just data science, but thinking critically about data and examining the impact of different approaches to collecting, using, and sharing data. Operationalizing data ethics, so evaluating data practices with the potential to adversely impact people and society through data collection, sharing, and use, and starting a cultural change by promoting data leadership, valuing data assets, and focusing on whole system user experience. Now, where we got to this was based on previous research that we did also with Arup around data sharing approaches for the built environment. So we know that data has the potential to help us tackle a variety of social, environmental, and economic challenges. And it requires sharing data not just within organizations, but also between partners and across sectors. And that requires investment in the data infrastructure that can help us to use data well. So like other industries, the organizations designing, building, operating, and maintaining the built environment are looking at how to create value from data. There are a range of existing approaches for increasing access to data and open collaborative models for building and maintaining the necessary data infrastructure. So a few that we have up there now are sort of data sharing agreements. That's the default model for sharing data between organizations and engaging with researchers. And they shape how data is used by providing sort of clarity around rights, responsibilities, and permitted forms of reuse. But other models and more important ones exist as well. There's pooling data from multiple organizations that allows data to be aggregated and analyzed in ways that individual organizations cannot achieve by themselves. But more importantly, interestingly, and what we're seeing as a kind of a future model is around decentralized data approaches. So initiatives like open banking use another approach based around decentralized publishing of data using open standards and a common framework that governs how data is accessed, used, and shared. So this works well when data is best shared by those who collect and maintain it, but the right approach depends on the purpose. However, for net zero, we see that trying to centralize all the data, which we see in a lot of different data portals and databases around the world, is not the best way. And in fact, we do need to have a more decentralized method. But now onto the main themes of the net zero paper. So within this paper, we discuss the need for businesses to really be data-enabled businesses. We see this in all industries that they're moving towards this a data-enabled business and data-informed strategy. It's a cultural change that is critical for commercial success because data powers decision-making on how to run internal operations, what types of products and services to design, which markets to enter, and channels to use to reach customers. And this is also true for businesses' net zero strategy. So to drive low carbon growth and innovation, businesses need actionable insights informed by real evidence and suitably granular data. Companies can only achieve their net zero targets by understanding their direct and indirect emissions, including up and down their value chain. And that requires collation, monitoring, and interrogation of robust and consistent data that enables them to see their progress and allows them to compare themselves across the industry. So, a net zero data strategy can be instrumental in shifting businesses to decarbonization by improving energy efficiency and moving to renewable forms of energy and lowering the operational carbon footprint of themselves and their supply chains. So, for an organization to achieve net zero, yes, it must become a data enabled business, but organizations do not exist in a vacuum. They are parts of sectors and industries and are situated in cities, regions, and countries. So standards around transparency and accountability are sharpening and expanding, And markets are increasingly want to see clear company performance against net zero targets as an indicator of trustworthiness and to refine assessments of supply chain emissions. Employees want reassurance as well that they work for a climate conscious organization, and customers are likewise interested in green credentials. So, a net zero data strategy is more than just using data better. At the heart of it is transparency to build trust and demonstrate trustworthiness. To achieve sectoral and national net zero goals, data enabled businesses must move from only looking internally at how data can improve operations and offerings to looking externally, seeing data sharing as a means to becoming a more trusted net zero organization within that wider ecosystem. So, making carbon data and other net zero commitments available openly to potential consumers and partners can help organizations build trust across the broader ecosystem. And the final point about why we need these net zero data strategies is that in mature data ecosystems, we see that data strategies evolve beyond the vision to use data internally or only externally for reporting and transparency. So, going back to the banking sector, open banking has brought seismic change. And the sector, once noted for its digital staticity, has built a nation leading data sharing ecosystem, delivering hundreds of new businesses and services to customers. In the energy sector, Open Energy and Open Net Zero are providing a data sharing fabric for the industry, and greater interoperability is being called for by government, industry, and civil society. So these mature data strategies foreground the benefits that can come from data collaboration and open innovation among stakeholders such as supply chain partners and even competitors. Actionable insights from data, in addition to transparency and openness, can lead to scalable data access that stimulates innovation, illustrates trustworthiness, and facilitates a more open market economy. This type of net zero data strategy, conscious of the net zero opportunities of open innovation, has the most significant benefits for both society and business. Data collaboration at this scale facilitates geographical and sectoral initiatives to reduce the carbon footprint of regions and supply chains. And creating new data enabled partnerships can reduce costs by using a shared data infrastructure and power new services to bring to market. So, net zero data strategies can enable built environment organizations to explore collaboration across a sector, geography, or problem space to design and deliver scalable net zero solutions. So, this is why we need net zero data strategies. Let me finish off a few points today by talking about how to implement them. The first is on building and maintaining data infrastructure. So, data infrastructure consists of data assets supported by people, processes, and technology. Data assets at the heart of any given infrastructure vary, but they include technical schemas for data exchange, metadata registries for locating relevant data lakes and processing environments designed for specialized data sets, as well as core reference data and identifier lists provided by APIs and downloads to improve interoperability. So, building and maintaining strong data infrastructure lays the foundation for better embedding of net zero data strategies and encompasses effectively managing data assets, standards, technologies, guidance, and policies. Making data and data infrastructure more available is a vital part of many organizational net zero data strategies. There's also implementing robust data governance. So this term is still quite broad, but net zero data governance can align to the principles, policies, and practices that are implemented to ensure the collection, processing, storage, and use of data achieve net zero carbon emissions. Net zero data governance could ensure that each stage of the data lifecycle is environmentally responsible. This includes evaluating the carbon footprint of data storage, transmission, and processing, and seeking ways to optimize energy use and reduce emissions. Further to decarbonizing data storage, net zero data governance can encourage organizations to minimize unnecessary data collection, processing, and storage. By reducing the amount of data collected and stored, organizations can decrease the energy required for processing and storage, lowering their carbon footprint. Operationalizing data ethics. So, data ethics is the evaluation of data practices that have the potential to adversely impact people and society. Data ethics relates to good practices around how data is collected, used, and shared. And data strategies must have data ethics embedded within them to ensure net zero strategies do not replicate or exacerbate existing biases. Operationalizing data ethics is a necessary consideration in implementing net zero data strategies. This means balancing the need to generate, extract, and derive value from data with the potential consequences of doing so. Ethical risks identified in the use of data and data driven technologies are not exclusive to the net zero context, but deserve additional caution because of the scale of deployment and the risk of increasing inequality. So data literacy is relevant in every industry, but it's more than just technical skills. Data literacy includes the ability to evaluate the impact of bias and limited sampling, examine different ways of data collection, compare and contrast how different organizations use data to convey important messages on topics such as climate change and net zero. So, net zero data literacy can help organizations understand how to navigate the data infrastructure of the nascent, fragmented, and growing net zero data ecosystem. A net zero data strategy means providing data literacy and net zero literacy training within an organization's skills and learning function. A lack of data skills, engagement, and data literacy will limit the successful implementation of any net zero data strategy. And finally, we need to talk about starting a data culture change. So that's a data culture is characterized by a strong focus on data and analytics, thought leadership, and a commitment to using data and information to inform and drive business decisions. Although a definition of a net zero data culture does not yet exist, embracing a data culture can help an organization improve its net zero strategy by providing a foundation for evidence-based decision making and continuous improvement. We see signs that organizations are acting in ways that might be expected in what we would call a net zero data culture. In some cases, organizations are collaborating with others, especially competitors, to use data to solve net zero challenges, without a clear view of how that will even improve the bottom line. In other words, the carbon benefits are apparently being seen as just as strategically important, if not more so, as the bottom line benefits. So I'll cap off today by just briefly recapping our views around net zero data strategies in the built environment. That they can help drive actionable insights, that they can promote transparency, that they can foster data collaboration and innovation. And in order to build them, we need strong data infrastructure, robust data governance, data literacy and skills, data ethics, and a cultural change. So thank you all very much. I'll pass it on to my esteemed panel colleagues. That's enough for me.
Thank you so much, Josh. That's a really brilliant overview. I'm now going to invite Chiara on for her presentation. And yeah, there we go. Over to you, Chiara.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Just give me a moment to screen share. Hi, everyone. I'm Chiara Cozzolino. I'm an associate director architect at TP Bennett. For who doesn't know, TP Bennett is a long-established design practice. We are based in London, Manchester, and Leeds with a network of partners around the world. And we are 102 years old. The sustainability team at TP Bennett is formed up to 40 staff members, of which there is a core dedicated team that you see on this slide. We have Passive House Designers, BREEAM AP, LEED AP, WELL AP, Fitwel Ambassador, and most of all, we share a true passion for sustainability. 60-70% of a building's carbon is emitted before the first user switches on the light. This is one of the data coming from the World Green Building Council in 2018, which makes us think of the enormous responsibility us as designer and the players of the construction industry have in reducing carbon. As TP Bennett, our commitment is to be carbon neutral. We are carbon neutral. We offset all of our emissions annually using gold standard certified schemes. We are 100% achieving our assessment on all the projects, LEED, BREEAM, WELL, Fitwel. We have delivered the first UK WELL certified project. And we also deliver the highest BREEAM scoring project with a 96.31%. So at TP Bennett, the net zero carbon as a process is broken into, of course, these two major categories, reducing embodied carbon and reducing operational carbon. Reducing embodied carbon means measure carbon first to understand the benchmark of reduction, prioritize opportunity for reuse, and as designers, spot those opportunities to present to our clients, understanding the life cycle of what we design and the products we specify, and design for a reversible design. So thinking about the next generation inheriting our design, our buildings. And then reducing operational carbon. So prioritize, of course, renewable and optimize any opportunity within the site. Using emerging technology, for instance, designing for smart building. And for this, we also utilize our unique library of responsibly sourced product, which I'll present later on, and support operation. So design user-friendly building and enable soft landing process to maximize the benefit of using the building in a clever way. So reducing embodied carbon, it's also done through refining the client brief at the early stage, design out unnecessary materials and waste, targeting simplicity of design and construction, issue potential suppliers with our supply chain responsible sourcing questionnaire at LIB, analyze and compare responses against project targets, and workshop and forums with preferred suppliers to discuss how to achieve better outcomes. Embodied carbon of materials used in architecture and interior design contribute to at least 40% of a building's total carbon footprint. Again, stressing the responsibility on the designers. So as designers, we face an enormous complexity of data that we need to become more and more aware and able to analyze and make informed decisions. So on this graph, on this image that you see, it's an example of a carpet tile range manufactured in the UK, but with their own global supply chain. And you can tell the journey that is behind the production of a single carpet tile and the complexity behind that. That's why we need tools to help us discerning this world of data. On the right-hand side of this slide, you will see a series of website and tools and database that we use on our projects. Once you receive the slides of this presentation, each one of these is a link if you were to refer to the same. And on the left-hand side, there is our own developed AdLib tool, which has been awarded the Sustainable Initiative of the Year in 2021 by AJ100. So we face quantitative data, and then as humans, we consider them across qualitative data. And in the middle, in the green one, there is the outcome, which is comprehensive, insightful, associative, and causative. For example, when assessing external walls build-ups and the criticality of making the right choice in terms of durability, cost saving, quality, and of course, carbon accountancy, we have got two examples, option 1 and option 2. Option 1 is the section of an external wall build-up made of an external leaf of half brick and an internal steel frame section. And the option 2 is a brick slips rain screen, so that use less brick material and less weight with an internal wall lining. So, and of course, with a secondary supporting frame. So it's difficult at first sight to understand and to establish which one would be less carbon intensive. But through the tools that we can use in-house, we can calculate that actually option 2, it's almost double the embodied carbon of option 1. The embodied carbon of materials used to construct an office account for 67% of its total carbon footprint. And therefore, AdLib. AdLib is a tool that we've developed a couple of years ago, and it's an in-house web app. We are looking at making it open source in the next year. At the moment, we've got more than 2,000 products loaded and we are aiming at 3,000 before it goes live for the wider public use. AdLib tackles 7 categories: material, chemicals and manufacturing, manufacturing resource consumption, circularity and end of life, transport, packaging, social sustainability and ethical sourcing, and embodied carbon. That's why we say it goes beyond carbon, because it covers an awareness of the product that otherwise is not represented just through carbon. One of the best feedback we've received on the use of this tool from the suppliers is that they themselves became more aware of the product they were selling by filling up our questionnaire. Perhaps I can stop 1 second and I can share the web app, and I welcome any question after this presentation. This is the internal website that we can use, and we can search product and materials. Suppliers are invited to upload their product. And for instance, I could look for a certain category. If I'm looking for a wall finish or a floor finish, select that category and get a range of products that have been uploaded by our suppliers. For instance, I've got 839 items there. And then I can filter through the various categories we described before on an intuitive traffic light system. For instance, I could be having more interest in product circularity on a certain project and make sure it's more of a local product and has got smart packaging, reducing the amount of carbon. And that's reduced to 113 products. And then accessing, I get the carbon footprint, a lot of information about the chemical contains, the manufacturing, the social impact, and the circularity. As for instance, if we go into social and sustainability policy and ethical sourcing, these are the questions our suppliers have replied to. Do you as a company have an ethical supply chain code or modern slavery system? Yes, no, and please upload relevant documentation to your company profile here. So going back to the presentation, there is also emerging pathway to carbon calculations. We are partnering with Fenestra Pro. Fenestra Pro is a tool for assisting BIM design and calculating operational carbon of early emerging designs. It works on the characteristic of the window designed in the project to give you a first estimate of the operational carbon. But also, we are partnering with Fenestra Pro to develop an embodied carbon balancing tool that can give an insight of the embodied carbon of the type of window of or facade system specified, and providing an understanding of the balance between embodied and operational carbon. So a case study where we have benefited of a balanced view between the two categories is Floral Street, is the refurbishment of a 6-story office building in London, where we have assessed the existing condition of the facade and the existing conditions of the windows. Just for clarity, on this project, we haven't used Fenestra Pro, as is a tool in development to balance embodied carbon versus operational carbon. But this process that I'm going to explain now can be facilitated by the use of Fenestra Pro as it becomes developed. So you can see here, there is a sketch of a diagrammatic sketch of a window, which depicts the current condition of the existing window and the current U values. And then there is a tier 3, tier 2, and tier 1 system of approach to the refurbishment. It goes from the very minimum improvement of the thermal performances by replacing faulty windows with broken glazing or broken gaskets, minimal cost expenditure to minimal intervention, to tier 3, where we are upgrading the whole windows with new windows. So the capacity to balance the advantages of reduced operational carbon with the amount of inputted embodied carbon gave us a better insight in going for the middle solution, which is tier 2, where we could actually retain all of the existing window, replacing the glazing and the gaskets and all the seals, by doing so improving the airtightness, the thermal performance, but storing within the building the embodied carbon of the existing windows. And then another tool that is emerging on the panorama for designers to account for carbon is called the Built Environment Carbon Database. Some of you may have heard of this, some may not. Has been announced recently and is a consortium of institutions, BRE, RIBA, RICS, Green Building Council, and so on, that have put together their forces, generate a unique UK database where we can source carbon data at entity level, which means as project approaches, project design categories, and at product level through environmental performance declaration and carbon number provided by the producers. And this is all for me. Thank you very much for your attention. I welcome any question at the end of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chiara. That's a fantastic presentation and a lot of detail there, so we can dig into some of that later. For now, I'm going to invite Dan on, and Dan will try and share his screen.
Thank you very much. Right, so hello everybody, my name is Dan Scott. So I'm Chief Data Scientist at WSP. So my role is to kind of lead a number of teams across our business to kind of help our customers deliver kind of data-driven decision making and improve outcomes for their businesses by kind of better understanding the problems they're trying to solve, bringing decision optimization, decision science into how they choose to design, what they choose to build, and how they choose to operate their assets going forwards to get the best possible outcomes. So if you've not heard of us, so WSP is quite a big global organization, so about 69,000 employees globally. We have a footprint in across the globe. Most countries, we have offices. Our areas of focus are kind of in the world of kind of engineering, design, management of assets, digital services, environmental services. We do a lot of work around net zero and sustainability consultancy, as well as a number of other areas as well. So if you kind of have a look at what our customers are kind of most interested in, as things stand at the moment. So digital is very much at the top of our customers' agenda, alongside ESG and net zero carbon. So most of our customers kind of recognize the need for change. They recognize the need for transformation. They're looking for kind of digital tools and different ways of thinking to help them kind of to deliver that. Across all sectors, our customers are generally looking for the ability to harness their data in a way to kind of make them able to make better decisions, improve their outcomes, deliver transformation. And they're all kind of generally seeking to kind of develop, communicate their ESG strategies, and they kind of recognise that kind of data is a key part of that challenge, and it's a key part of how they improve their performance and improve their standing in society as well. And those sorts of things. And as a kind of engineering consultancy, obviously we kind of respond to that. So we have a whole range of different tools that we have in the kind of consultancy space and the digital space that we kind of offer. So one of which is sort of up on the screen here is a tool called Daisy. So this is a generative AI tool for kind of early design of buildings. So basically looks at the land footprint and kind of searches through various different building configurations, looking at the amount of carbon in the building, kind of energy gain based on the the water window ratios and the kind of the aspect which direction it's facing, how much sun it's getting, and various other bits and pieces. So this is just one of many different tools that kind of enables us and therefore on behalf of our customers to kind of understand some early doors decisions that you might want to make around the design of the building, kind of well before you've got significantly off the ground in terms of the design process and the building process. But I really didn't want to kind of speak too much about that, because I really wanted to come back to the kind of primary question for this particular panel, which is around maximising data for net zero. So the first thing I wanted to kind of just kind of visit was this kind of question of what is the question? So this Henry Ford quote that's up on the screen at the moment is quite commonly used for kind of design thinking workshops. So I'm using it a little bit out of context here, but really what it gets to the heart of here is that there's generally a gap between when we kind of describe what we think we want versus what we actually want. So this kind of quote here, there's if I'd asked people what they wanted, they said faster horses. It's because at that point in time, people couldn't have envisaged the concept of an automobile, but and therefore we describe this kind of concept of I'd like faster horses. But actually, when you kind of really distill it down, what they're really saying is I want to be able to get from point A to point B much more quickly in more comfort, those sorts of things, and therefore the automobile becomes a kind of logical argument to that. And I think there's an element of this to this question around maximising data. Well, do we actually want to maximise the data? Do we actually want more data? Is that what we're trying to get? Is that the end that we're going to? And the answer here is no, not really. What we're trying to do is be able to make much better decisions that enable us to move towards a net zero position across our buildings and all the other things that we do. So what we're trying to do here is really understand that problem. The danger is we kind of fixate on the data as a kind of as a way to get there, and for good reasons. That data is really important to this question. I'm not dismissing that, but we have to be really careful not to treat data as the solution. So just layering more and more data on top of the way that we already do things anyway is not necessarily going to drive us forwards. We're kind of assuming and relying on the fact that the data will naturally kind of unearth new insights and kind of new thinking, but that's not necessarily true. And there's lots of examples out there where just throwing more things at it doesn't necessarily change the status quo, and just kind of builds a kind of almost a level of bureaucracy and other bits and pieces around it that we need to be careful. And we also need to understand our own incentives as well. I mean, so again, if you look across lots of sectors where data is kind of being brought in greater quantities to kind of ostensibly to improve decision making, but actually when you step back on it, you go, actually, is that data improving the decision? Is it improving what you're doing? Is it materially changing what you're going to do? Or are you using the data to justify something that you wanted to do anyway? And therefore, are you trying to use data to break down a kind of internal inertia and internal bureaucracy that kind of says, okay, well, we wouldn't change the status quo and do that instead unless there was a really strong business case, and data becomes the way of creating that business case? Because that's kind of a very different question that we're trying to solve. And net zero itself is obviously a big challenge, at kind of global level. So we need to be really careful here in that net zero itself is not going to be delivered through small incremental changes. It needs to be delivered. It's going to have to be delivered through fairly big, significant disruptions and step changes in how we do things. And therefore, we need to be a little bit careful not to kind of fall into a rut of just thinking, well, if I just knew a little bit more, I'd make a much better decision, because most of the evidence and science kind of says that's not true. And there's obviously a famous quote from Einstein as well, as we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And this kind of falls into the same sort of category as that. So we just need to kind of think really carefully about what it is that we're actually trying to do. And generally, from a data perspective, start with the question, start with the experiment, start with the outcome that you're looking for, and then work backwards to what data would I need in order to inform that, in order to be able to kind of carry out a balanced experiment, a balanced consideration of that. and then that becomes the data that I'm interested in. So it's not just about trying to get everything, it's about trying to be very focused about things that we really, really want, because it's important to a decision that we want to make. Which then brings us this kind of challenge around, you know, are we looking for data quantity or are we looking for data quality? Yeah, so those two things are, generally speaking, in tension. You know, if we try and get more and more data, then the good chance that the quality of what we're collecting may start to drop. And similarly, if we want really high fidelity, high quality data, then it becomes a lot more expensive to capture, and therefore we're unlikely to get as much of it. And again, it's about understanding that balance. What's most important to us? One of the kind of most misused phrases, you know, or quotes that I, you know, come across in my field is, you know, the concept of data is the new oil. And people kind of misunderstand that quite a little bit, because, you know, people generally kind of think of it as, well, you know, oil, which used to be the big thing that, you know, everyone made money out of oil and that sort of thing. So saying data is the new oil means that data is now, you know, in and of itself intrinsically very valuable. We need to go and get more and more of it. That's actually not what it was intended to mean in terms of a quotation. It actually, you know, was implying that, you know, oil itself in its crude form, as it is extracted from the ground, is not itself actually particularly useful. It's only once you refine it and make things out of it that it becomes valuable and useful. And data is the same. You know, just data on its own is not actually particularly valuable. It's only at the point at which you can actually do something different as a result of having that data, when you turn it into insight and therefore a different set of decisions that you would not have made otherwise. That is when it becomes valuable. So a really good example of this kind of quantity versus quality example would be if we look at the real extreme ends of the spectrum. So if we look at, you know, obviously there's a big explosion around large language models at the moment, ChatGPT and those sorts of things, and they're quite a good example to use here, in that they're probably the biggest consumer of data that we have kind of active at the moment. They harvest vast amounts of data into these large language models to do what they do. So if we look at ChatGPT, we say on paper it's very much a data quantity tool, you know, because it's basically harvesting the entire contents of the internet to some extent, and therefore, you know, in order to kind of inform its learning and inform its capabilities. But if we really kind of drill down into it and look at actually what's really helping it, you'll find that the training in ChatGPT has a quite a heavy bias towards certain types of data. So within the data sets that ChatGPT is trained with, are data sets such as Wikipedia, and you'll find that actually ChatGPT's learning is heavily biased towards things like Wikipedia. And so why is that? You know, given that it's got access to literally kind of everything within limits, why is it so biased towards, you know, just one website, albeit, you know, a fairly significant one, but it's, you know, in terms of the total number of words written on the internet, it's you know, a drop in the ocean. Yes, it's quite a heavy influencer, and the reason is that sites such as Wikipedia are heavily curated. So the community, you know, the Wikipedia community have created this site. It's very structured. It's very, you know, it's all linked. It's all, you know, and it's very well thought out. And it's very well maintained and structured in terms of how it sets out its data. So it's very easy for something like ChatGPT to go and learn an awful lot from that highly curated, highly, generally speaking, accurate data. As opposed to if we looked at, for instance, the contents of social media, which, you know, in principle, ChatGPT also has access to. What you're looking at there is significantly more data, but with very little structure, very little kind of implicit kind of meaning and insight, to be perfectly blunt, within that data set. And the big difference between those two areas is around the incentives and the motivations behind the curation of that data. So in Wikipedia, you know, those pages are kind of created and maintained and updated by people who have, you know, passionate interest in the subjects that they're writing about on those pages. They have a vested interest in trying to make sure that that data is accurate, it's correct, it's, you know, it's balanced, it's cross-referenced, it's, you know, everything is there because, you know, people are volunteering their time around topics that they find interesting. And while they probably didn't think of things like ChatGPT as being the end product for that, they were looking to communicate some information out. If we look at social media data or anything like that, the the incentives are very different. People are not necessarily trying to be accurate. They're not even necessarily trying to get much information across. They're sometimes just trying to kind of say something that happened to occur to them at that point in time, or even just kind of get people to respond to them and other bits and pieces. So the incentives around that, in terms of accuracy, in terms of structure, in terms of understandability, all those things are just not necessarily there. And bringing it back to the kind of carbon net zero world, we need to think about this in exactly the same way. So it's all very well kind of setting out really kind of great structures and that sort of thing and requirements, but we need to think about where the incentives are, because unlike a lot of other sectors, the information that we require is quite diversified. We have quite complex supply chains and other bits and pieces going on within there. How do those incentives flow through those supply chains to make it worthwhile investing the time and energy to provide data in an accurate, complete and honest way within that process? Because if I'm a manufacturer of a building material, and my material is high carbon, high environmental impact and that sort of thing, and me kind of being a completely open book, transparent about the impact of my material might mean that you choose to use less of it. Where's my incentive to really engage with that process? So we need to be really mindful in how we kind of structure and specify the data we want about some of these human behaviors that kind of creep in. It's not just about the data that they say this. We as human beings, we don't act as robots. We have a kind of emotional response and a self-vested interest in this. And if you don't design your system to understand those vested interests and respond to those and be robust to those, then the danger is you have a lot of high fidelity, really quality information around materials that are have much less environmental impact, or have a positive environmental impact, and much kind of shakier, potentially even less honest data around materials that have a much more adverse impact. And that doesn't necessarily isn't conducive to being able to then directly compare and make a clear argument and clear set of decisions that enable you to kind of pivot in the direction that you need to do. Clearly, kind of regulation and other bits and pieces comes into that. That's almost the kind of counterpoint to that argument. So you use regulation to kind of force the point and say, well, you have to provide certain bits of information, you have to try and provide it accurately, and all these things. And again, that's a really important tool in the arsenal here. But again, we have to understand that regulation can only do so much. Regulation will only drive people to do, under certain circumstances, the minimum necessary to comply. And even then, there will always be some incentive to cheat if you think you can get away with it. Which is not to sort of say, I'm not here to kind of present as a kind of data heretic. Clearly the data, collecting it in a way that is open, transparent, shared, that everyone's got access to, and all these sorts of things is absolutely important, and is absolutely part of how we need to make better decisions going forward. It's just not the be all and end all. So the other way that and an area that we're kind of trying to pioneer in WSP is to kind of start to step slightly away from that, and trying to kind of slightly decouple from the need to provide absolute data to kind of the nearest decimal point around all these sorts of things, and start to think about actually uncertainty analysis around these sorts of things. So if you think about any activity that we do, and it's kind of referred to in some of the earlier presentations, but a lot of decisions that we make quite early on, will have a kind of long-term impact. That kind of concept of 60-70% of a building's carbon being locked in before anyone does anything with it. Well, some of that carbon's locked in by decisions that are made in really, really early doors. And it's about kind of understanding some of those, because at the point at which those decisions are made, it's probably when there's the greatest uncertainty about what that actually means, because we won't necessarily know exactly how it's going to be constructed. We won't necessarily know how future legislation might change around different things and other aspects. So kind of bringing that uncertainty analysis and actually embracing that uncertainty to some extent, and saying, well, we can't ever get data accuracy to 100%. There's always going to be errors. There's always going to be noise in that data That means that we can never know these things absolutely, but what we can do is know them from a statistical perspective, and therefore try and maximize our chances of achieving net zero or that kind of carbon positive kind of outcomes. The other thing we're pioneering is kind of adaptive planning and optimization, which is where we then start to build in decision optimization algorithms and that sort of thing, which again kind of cascade through that uncertainty analysis. And what that does is try to build in key decision points. So we try to make decisions now where we can best mitigate and best kind of spread bet against the range of futures as they might unfold. But we also kind of build in certain points along that kind of build phase, along that design phase, and even into the operational phase, where you can still make a decision in response to emerging information. So as you kind of realize that actually maybe something's not panned out quite as you expected, you can pivot your design or pivot your strategy to respond to that change in such a way that you're minimizing your losses. You're still giving yourself the capability to get back to where you wanted to get to. And still achieve the outcomes that you wanted. So you're trying to build in that flexibility kind of in response to the fact that you can never know everything. And so this is where we kind of feel that there's a big, this is likely to be one direction that this whole kind of area starts to move in, is that kind of, trying to get away from, absolutes and trying to kind of build into, okay, how can we justify doing the right things, the right strategies, even though we can't be 100% sure that that's exactly how it's going to play out, but how can we kind of balance that off against everything else that could happen, and get the right kind of combination of decisions that kind of spread bet against those futures and give us the maximum chance of the least possible regrets in what we've chosen to do. And with that, I'll bring that to a close to give us some time to answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Dan. I'm going to invite all of the panelists back with your cameras on if possible. I think there's that your last points there, I think maybe we could pick up on with Chiara and also Josh. I just think I'd quite like your views, Josh and Chiara, on that point around actually what are we collecting this information for before we even decide to be open source about it? Do we actually, are we thinking hard enough about the purpose behind the data and what you've seen in your own professional lives?
Can I pick up that question? Yes, I found it very interesting, Dan's presentation. Thank you for that. And it aligns with a lot of the question and the thinking we have every day around the data of the product we specify and we look for. So in this field, the tool we developed was born. So it's a questionnaire. Yeah, it's now a tool, but it starts as a questionnaire. What does a questionnaire? A questionnaire prompts all the chain of the manufacturing supplying to ask those questions themselves and create awareness. It's not, the main purpose of the tool is not just and only to provide an answer to say this is green, this is red, this is good, this is bad, but is to provide an insight and an awareness to, yes, the designer, but perhaps is a butterfly effect on the design industry. If you think 5 or 6 years ago, something like this wasn't even into play. Some level of this level of deep questioning of the chain of product that we put into our buildings and that we advise our clients to buy, as simple as that, it wasn't such a thing. Today we do question, we do go into the detail, we do ask those information to all the supply chain, and we want the supply chain to answer as honestly, as transparency as possible. We are a design practice. We are not an entity or a certifier entity. So we create that open channel of discussion, and we try to prompt awareness of the butterfly effect that is behind the production of a single carpet tile.
Thank you, Chiara. That really helps explain your perspective. Josh, I wonder from the sort of the open data side of things, where you sit on that idea that Dan was raising about not everybody's playing the same game. So whilst you may want people to be open about their carbon impact, some will not be incentivized to do so because their business case does not match the net zero agenda. What do you feel about that, and how are we going to sort of compare apples and pears, or just compare products or businesses that do reveal a lot versus those products and businesses that don't?
Yeah, well, it's a kind of a multifaceted challenge for one. But I mean, fundamentally, we believe that organizations shouldn't be sort of competing necessarily on the data that they hold, but on the value that they can create from it. So leveling the playing field is always a big part of that. What we see happening in other industries that can help with this is something around open standards and interoperability, so that you can have these kind of comparative measurements, that you can kind of rank kind of organizations on their either the net zero commitments or other environmental commitments, if that's one way of sort of looking at it. So then you can add that kind of commercial element to it, where if the demand is there for greener businesses and kind of better services that are being provided by more net zero friendly organizations, then there's a way to sort of judge that accordingly. There's also a role for policymakers and legislators and regulators to play. So they do need to, at some kind of, they are doing it already, but to continue to do so, to regulate the transparency around the kind of climate reporting and emissions reporting and things like that. But also, what would be kind of stronger is around that interoperability element. So there's lots of different ways to do carbon calculations these days, and some organizations will pick those that are more favorable to them than others. So there needs to be a way to interoperate across that data ecosystem as well.
Thank you. I've got one question coming in that's directed more at you, Chiara, which is around your system at TP Bennett, the database. Does it link with others, or if it doesn't at the moment, is that something that you might be looking at?
Yeah. We have been thinking about linking with other systems, but at the moment is an internal database that puts under TP Bennett's value umbrella all of the product we reach out. So this is an important message to share. There is a series of TP Bennett values, and when the tool will be available, it will be a TP Bennett produced tool. Again, it's not an entity, but is our screen system of the product we specify. In terms of integration, well, something very practical. We are integrating it with our physical library, so perhaps it's not the type of answer that the question wanted to have, but we are looking at actually less digitalize this tool in a way that all of the products that are there have got a direct physical presence in our premises.
And will it be open source, Chiara? Is others outside TP Bennett will be able to look at the library?
That's a very good question, and perhaps good idea. It's not debated at the moment, but
fine. Okay, well, I think it's one to watch, definitely.
Yeah.
We've actually, really sadly, I think, run out of time. I had lots more questions that I wanted to ask myself, but I think those presentations are very thought-provoking, and hopefully we can revisit some of those with all of you in future webinars. But for now, I just want to say a huge thank you to Chiara, Dan, and Josh. And just to remind the audience that we have more coming up with Digital Building Week. I think there's another webinar at 2 p.m. today, and we've also got webinars going on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So do come back for more. But for now, that's all we've got time for. So thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chloe. Bye.
Bye-bye.